Hello all. So now that you have your QRadar sim installed and configured, so far we have configured LDAP and LDAP as login. So now we want to start sending log sources into QRadar. So I did show you how to do the win collect as a standalone install, which we did install that together. Today we're going to do Linux. So I'm going to show you how to send Linux logs, be it CentOS, Ubuntu desktop, or Ubuntu server logs directly into QRadar. So the first thing we want to do here is log into your Linux device via SSH. And once you do that, you're going to use VI and go to etc rsyslog.com. So if you don't know, rsyslog is software built in or installed into Linux OSs that you can use to forward. You can use as a client and as a server. So you can either use rsyslog to configure your Linux device as a server, which other Linux devices can send logs into it. In this case, we're configuring this as a client. So we're using the client to send the logs into our QRadar SIM system. So we'll start by going into the configuration file, which is in the etc directory. So if you have Nano, you can use Nano, but since this is a CentOS system, I haven't installed Nano on there. So we're going to use VI. So VI etc rsyslog.com. So you want to go all the way down to the end of this com file. Normally, this is not going to be included on there. The reason why you see this is because I already have it configured to send logs into the QRadar SIM. So if you wanted to add this, if this was a new configuration, like we are trying to do this tutorial for, you will hit the I button for insert, and then you go and type um, asterisk dot asterisk, and then you use at sign, and you type the IP address of your server. So, and then you use port 514. So, in this case, when you do it like this, you will be using the default. You can either put the 514 or just leave the IP address itself. QRadar is going to default to using port 514. If you have a different port that you use for syslog, you can put that on there, but QRadar uses port 514. So note that if you're using a different port here, you're going to have to change that into QRadar. So here, to send all the logs from this Linux box into the QRadar, you have to do this star, full stop, star, and then @ sign and the IP address. And we use the port 514 for UDP. If you were doing this for TCP, you're going to put the double @ sign and that use TCP. So we're going to use UDP because TCP is slow, even though it's reliable, but it's slow. So we use UDP. That works just fine for me. Note that those asterisk sends all the logs, so including cron logs, mail logs, emergency logs, authentication logs. It sends everything into QRadar. If you wanted to send specific things, let's say you wanted to send just the kernel, you do kernel period and asterisk and then the @ sign and the IP address and the port. If you wanted to do authentication logs only, you do the same auth and so forth. So once you're done configuring that, you're going to quit. You're going to quit by using the X, and once that's completed, you are going to want to type the command systemctl restart rsyslog. So once you do restart the service remote syslog, you should see that at that point your logs from your server should start populating on here. If you do not get the logs in QRadar after doing this configuration, sometimes I've noticed, especially with QRadar Community Edition, it may or may not automatically detect your Linux logs. If that's the case, if after waiting 10 to 15 minutes and you don't see the logs coming in, or you see something like unknown, um, you want to go into your admin tab and go into log sources. And once you go into log sources, you go to add. And once you select the add, you're going to put the log source name, you do the log source description, you do the log source type. In this case, we'll do Linux. Um, just right here, we can just type Linux. Do Linux OS, and once you do that, the configuration defaults to syslog. That's what we're using. The log source identifier is for the IP address. So you can either put the IP address on here or the host name. And once you do all that, you can go ahead and save the connection, and it's going to ask you to deploy changes. And then at that point, you deploy changes. And so, like we can see on here, these log sources I have set up on here for the Omada controller and Nessus, this was manually added because you can see auto discovery is set to false. After I did the configuration, QRadar did not automatically detect this log source, so I had to go create it. Once you create it, just give it a full, after you deploy the changes, give it a couple of minutes, and you can always go check the log activity tab, or you can come here to the log sources, and if you see the status change to success, it means QRadar did recognize that. And if we go on here and see for the log sources, if we narrow or filter that to the Nessus logs, you're going to see the logs for that Nessus server I was just using before. So if we put that on here for real time, if we change that to real time, you can see on here that if I go on there and let's say we do a test logger test, you can see that on there. So we did send the test log message to the QRadar sim, and you can see on here that it came from Nessus, the root user test. So, and that's the IP address of this box. And so once you get that done, then you'll be all good to go. Your Linux syslog configuration to send logs into QRadar should be complete.